For many months, Britons who'd hoped that differences would emerge between the 27 EU countries they were negotiating with have been confounded. Instead, Michel Barnier's team has been given complete authority to conduct the negotiation, and discipline remained very firm. But now, at this 11th hour, in a period of high drama really, there are fractures appearing between some of those countries in the run-up to Sunday's planned summit. Spain, France and some of the Scandinavian countries have all expressed reservations about their own issues that they care about, particularly with the draft withdrawal agreement. Now that's led to some concern here in Berlin and a desire to push it through. Now earlier this evening I spoke to Peter Altmaier, the Minister for the Economy and a close political associate of Angela Merkel, and started off by asking him whether he hoped there really would be a summit on Sunday.
There is a lot at stake and therefore if it is possible to agree on Sunday, we should do it. I know there are a lot of diverging interests and conflicting interests still, but I believe these problems can be overcome.
So the German government message to its partners would be, look, now is not the time on fishing or Gibraltar to hold this up?
Well, the package that has been achieved is a comprehensive one, and that means that when you try to open one specific issue again, then others will be opened automatically as well, and then you can arrive in a big mess. I know that some people in the UK are arguing in favor of reopening the package, others in European countries as well. That is a matter for the heads of states and government to decide how to proceed. Personally, I believe as sooner we can give the message to business, to citizens, that we have agreed a soft Brexit, as better it will be for everybody.
Is it, from your perspective, as far as the UK is concerned, a take it or leave it package?
Well, I'm not interfering with British politics, and this is something that has to be decided by British MPs. My assumption is, and this applies to both sides, of course, whenever you reopen the package, to risk getting in exchange something you might perhaps not like. This is my experience after 25 years in politics, and therefore I will do my utmost to avoid new demands from the side of EU, and our British partners, of course, will have to decide on their approach and their position. I understood Theresa May's speeches and interviews in a way that she also believes.
And would you say now at this point, nearly 2.5 years after the referendum, that you are basically optimistic that this can be done, or is it still open to doubt? Is a hard Brexit still a distinct possibility, do you think, at this point?
Every responsible politician should try to avoid the possibility of a hard Brexit. This is one. The second is, and let's make no mistake about it, even a soft Brexit will have some undesired consequences for both sides, whether we like it or not. And this is what we have to realize, and therefore we should avoid such a scenario of an uncontrolled and unpredictable Brexit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So can Theresa May realistically secure better terms with the EU than what's currently on the table? We're joined by Yanis Varoufakis, who as former Greek finance minister had plenty of experience of negotiating directly with the EU, and Nina Schick, who's the political consultant specialising in Brexit and risk. Welcome to you both. Peter Altmaier says don't reopen the package. Now, Yanis, you've been in the room with these people, with the EU. Your experience of what it's like to be that third country on the outside?
Well, we're not a third country. We're definitely within the core of the Eurozone. But I think that what you really want me to comment on is the fact that once the European Union presents a deal on the table, it is take it or leave it. there is no way that it could be unpicked or that it will be somehow substantially changed, either by Theresa May or by any other government, unless the British government, whichever British government, goes for a Norway kind of off-the-shelf agreement, which is already there for the taking, and which Theresa May, I think she will live to regret that, did not opt for 2 years ago.
Interesting. So you think it has to be a model that already exists? You don't think, I mean, what we're hearing from some politicians is, I can use my charisma, I can do it in this way, we'll be more welcoming, we'll be less aggressive. I mean... That's
delusional. It is delusional because there are no negotiations happening in Brussels. Nobody negotiates with the European Union. The European Union sends you... You heard the German Federal Minister of the Economy. He said, oh, it's got nothing to do with me. It's between the two parties. Who are the two parties? It is London and Brussels. Brussels comprises bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are like software, like algorithms. They have a checklist. Mr. Barnier has no mandate to negotiate with his Mrs. May about anything of substance. So he goes tick, 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 tick. Now, I have to say that Mrs. May got out of this negotiation the best deal she could get as within the constraints, the self-imposed constraints, inane constraints in my view, of ending freedom of movement at some point and maintaining the Irish unity in a sense. But it is a terrible deal nevertheless, and it is, I will repeat that, far inferior to a Norway Plus agreement that she could have had instead.
When you hear Brussels described like this as basically an algorithm with legs, Nina, do you sort of bristle or do you think that's broadly wrong?
No, I mean, I broadly agree with what Yanis has said, and I think, like, you know, throughout these negotiations it was quite clear that the negotiating mandate was agreed by the 27 leaders, and the Commission and Barnier and his task force is simply doing that work. Now, as Yanis pointed out, you know, the UK is going to be invariably in a worse off position than what it had before. So the question is, why is that? And I think a lot of commentators in this country are saying that it is because Theresa May is a bad negotiator or the civil servants were in cahoots with the EU. But in reality, this is exactly where the UK would have ended up vis-a-vis the EU, its red lines and its negotiating priorities, primarily being maintaining the integrity of the single market, and the Tory party's own red lines. So I think this is inevitably how it would have played out.
I mean, Yanis, you met the EU ministers in very different circumstances. I mean, Greece was in crisis, right? The UK did not go into this in the same way, in crisis.
That's right. I mean, thank goodness Britain is not bankrupt and it's not in the euro. So they cannot switch off your ATMs tomorrow morning. So that puts you in a much better position.
So when you say switch off, did you find that bullying behaviour?
Well, don't you remember what happened in late June?
I remember what happened. I'm asking
They closed down our
ATMs
in order to asphyxiate us, in order for us to sign on the dotted line. And the result was I resigned, but my Prime Minister surrendered.
Gave them everything.
So, Okay, so you are in a completely different position.
Are you now looking at their position saying they're absolutely right to have done that, or did you feel fundamentally bullied and badly treated?
I think they forget about what they did to us. It was a major self-inflicted injury by the European Union. The European Union's respect for democracy went down the drain and it lost support amongst Democrats across Europe, even politicians or citizens who disagreed with my government.
Which may then have fed into the rise of populism, the Brexit vote, and the other consequence that we've seen since Greece.
But there's also a parallel to be drawn between the promises that were made by Brexiteers and the promises that were made by Syriza in 2015. So in the case of Syriza, there is no possibility of having debt relief if you're still a member of the Eurozone, and the Greek public did not.
That is not so.
It is also democratic. The German people, who are, you know, big holders of Eurozone tax, they don't want that debt relief to be granted.
That is not correct.
European leaders like Angela Merkel are supporting their own democracies.
Let me put it simply. If you have lent me a very large amount of money and you want most of it back, you've got to allow me a debt restructure so that bankers do this every day. In order to get more of the money that they owed back, they restructure the debt of the companies and the families that are insolvent.
Let me put you back
so
to Greece.
So it was against the interest of the German people.
And look at the bigger question, which is when you see populist movements, whether it's Syriza, whether it's Brexit...
sorry, we were not a populist movement.
You don't call that a populist movement?
Absolutely not. I never made a promise in the pre-election campaign, never made a promise of granting €1 to anyone who was above the poverty line. That is not populism. And it's not populist to actually argue that the only way we can return more of the money that we owe back to our creditors is by having a sensible debt restructure with a lowering of corporate tax, VAT and so on, in order to make the economy breathe, so that we can produce the income from which we will repay. There was nothing populist about that.
Do you think
and we were Europeanist.
Do you think, and that's the difference, because Britain was starting from the point of saying we don't want that anymore. Do you think there was any way of getting more from this deal by doing it in a different way?
Absolutely not. And I think that actually the UK has done fairly well within the constraints of the EU vis-à-vis the negotiations, both in terms of the backstop. It's not in the Irish.
So what do you think Theresa May is doing in Brussels this weekend? Is that just for show?
This is posturing, and I think that other EU leaders are obviously trying to get more in the political declaration. This is not about the withdrawal agreement. That's already done. And I think that Angela Merkel is coming out in favour of the UK because she does not want this to be even harder for Theresa May to sell at home. Of course, if Theresa May comes back with some kind of small victory, it makes it easier for her to sell to her skeptics in her party.
Thank you both very much.